Konnichiwa. I will do my best to speak slowly. If I go too quickly, just wave your hands. I want to start by thanking the entire NTT data team, Oji-san, Shikawa-san, and everybody at NTT Data who has made this possible. I want to thank my friend Toru-san for 31 years. I'm not sure how you got that picture, but just know that I have some of you as well. My hope today is to spend some time talking about the companies that we've studied from all over the world that blend the best of digital and physical. There's a lot of discussion in the world about digitization and how digitization is changing every type of company. But I want us to take a slightly different perspective today. I want us to make sure that we embrace the digital, but not forget the power of physical. So if all goes well, real quickly, Toru-san gave a great explanation of me. I'm the short, bald guy up here on stage, investor, operator, did my undergraduate work in the Bay Area in California at the University of California at Berkeley, and my graduate work at Stanford. I own a tie. I don't know where it is, and that's why I'm not wearing it today. It's somewhere in my closet. And once upon a time, as you saw from the picture, I used to have hair. This doesn't have anything to do with brains and brawn, but I like to put it up. As we go through today, I want us to start by let's think about two companies. Let's think about Airbus and Uber. And if I were to ask you which company is digital and which company is physical, our instinct is to say that Airbus is physical. Airbus makes big airplanes. And Uber is digital because we interact with it through our phones, through an application. We call it a platform. And yet, right now, Airbus planes, when they fly from one location to another location, will generate 1 terabyte of data in each flight. And Uber, right now, is taking tens of thousands of people like us, made of atoms and not bits, in cars made of atoms and not bits, from one physical location to another physical location. And when we think about it, both of these companies really do blend digital and physical. Now, the question we might think is, what are the relative advantages of each of these companies? If we think about Airbus, they're very good at systems engineering. They're very good at quality assurance, and they're great at manufacturing. They struggle trying to get data off of the airplanes. They struggle with a very complex supply chain. And if we think about Uber, they're wonderful at data, and they're wonderful at logistics. They're really bad at government relations. They're really bad at managing relationships with their drivers. And when they tried to do autonomous systems, an engineer there took a few features out of the software, and it actually killed somebody. This is not good. So if we think about digital and physical companies, sometimes where they come from, we'll talk a little bit about their relative strengths. What's different this time? My guess is everybody in this room has a smartphone. And in your phone, you have more computing power than we used to send human beings to the moon and bring them home alive 53 years ago. And we expect always to be connected. The last time any of you got on an airplane and the Wi-Fi was not working, you were very angry. In fact, if I ask you, how many of you sleep with your phone next to your bed? Most hands go up. How many of you have children? How many of you have children who sleep with their phones? How many of you know that trying to get your phone away from your child is like World War III? We expect to always have our phones with us. And in fact, some of you sleep with your phones next to your bed, but you're kind of afraid to admit it in front of everybody else. And this is impacting not just traditional companies and digital companies, but there is not an industry, healthcare, insurance, mobility, education. Everyone's being impacted by this blending of digital and physical. And the disruptors, the new companies who come into the space, are playing by a completely different set of rules about how they run their business. And the incumbents have to defend their existing businesses that are large and profitable and often are very, very critical to their countries. And the new companies have a completely different way about thinking about business. If there are 3 messages that I hope you take away from the book, they would be these 3 things. First, the best companies combine brains and brawn, digital and physical. And we will talk about those 10 attributes as I go through my talk. The second thing I would hope you take away is that the large established organizations, many of which, like we see in Japan, they are not doomed to fail. And the startups, the disruptors from Silicon Valley or from China, they are not destined to succeed. And the third thing that we'll talk about is that I would suggest that a new type of leadership is required in a world where everything is connected. And I call this systems leadership, and we'll talk a bit more about that today. At this point, we've studied over 90 different companies from Asia, Europe, North and South America, the Middle East, Africa. In fact, there isn't a part of the world that we have not been able to look at this, and we find that these opportunities exist all over our planet. Today, I'll introduce the Brains and Brawn framework, and I will introduce 5 digital attributes that are very important for the next 10 to 20 years. I'll talk in more detail about those in a minute. Those are the brainy attributes. I will also talk about 5 physical attributes, the brawn attributes. And you can use this framework to analyze your company and see how your company does on the brains and brawn scale, which we'll talk about after we finish the presentation. Now, you can actually rate your company on a 1 to 10 scale on each of these 10 attributes and give your company a score. And the perfect company would score 100 points, 10 points in each of these 10 categories. But no company is great at all 10 categories. And the idea behind this framework is to allow you to do an honest assessment of your company and figure out where are we strong and where are the areas that we need to invest in order to improve. Okay, let's start first with the 5 digital or brainy attributes. And the first one is the use of analytics or data in companies. When I work with large organizations around the world, what I hear repeatedly from the men and women in those companies is that they have lots of data and they aren't using it. But it's not just about the ability to have data and to use the data. Companies need to think strategically about how they use the data and the ethical and moral issues that surround the use of data. The company that I write about in the book is Charles Schwab and their use of data. Charles Schwab, the very large American financial services company. There are $8 trillion in assets being deposited at Schwab. And how they think about data is not what can they use data to serve their customers with, but they ask themselves, what would our customers want us to do with this data? So they not only offer a full range of financial services, but an example that I learned from Walt Bettinger, who's the CEO of Charles Schwab, is the following. If a person is on the Schwab website and they go up and they choose life events, divorce, at that moment in time, Schwab might have information about something that's happening in their customer's life that even the partner in a marriage might not know. And the question that Schwab asks himself is not what can they do with that data, but what should they do with that data. And they talk about making all of their decisions through customers' eyes. Every decision on how to use data is started by the question of what would our customers want us to do with this information. They hire unbelievably talented data scientists and data engineers. But the leadership about how they think about applying the data is just as important as to what they can do with the data. Let me compare that to the American company Meta or Facebook. In my country, maybe all over the world, very few people trust Meta to do the right things with their data. Schwab takes the other perspective, which is how do we make sure we build trust longer term with our clients to ensure that they stay with us over time. Your organizations, even if you come from a traditional mobility industry or transportation industry or healthcare industry, you're going to have a lot of data on your clients. You will use it to serve them better, but it's also an advantage and opportunity for you to actually build trust with them for the longer term. So how we think about using data as the first of the digital attributes, it's not just the digital competency, but it's the leadership that comes with thinking about how we use the data to serve our customers better. The second of the digital attributes, the other part, the first one, the digital attributes, is the left side of the brain. That's why I call it brains. That's how we think about analytics. The right side of the brain is how we use creativity. And everybody needs to think about how they use creativity to serve their customers better. We found that the best companies that we studied combined both business model innovation in addition to technological innovation. Now, there's a company that we studied called Align Technology, which was actually spun out of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. They create the clear plastic aligners for straightening our teeth. Many of you might have yourselves or your children or your friends had braces on your teeth when you were a teenager. I see a few people nodding. No one likes braces. Braces are painful and they hurt. This company figured out a way that they could take a digital picture of your mouth, come up with a plan to align each of your teeth specifically and cleanly in ways that brackets and wires from braces cannot do, and give you a customized smile that's considered attractive in Japan, which is actually different than an attractive smile in Brazil, which is actually different than an attractive smile in India. And it's not just the digital side of this. They send the files to their engineers in Puerto Rico who come up with that plan. And then they send those files to their factories in Mexico. And they send out 500,000 customized clear plastic aligners for straightening your teeth. They manufacture them every single day. And they send those clear plastic aligners out all over the world. They are the world's largest users of 3D printers, more than Adidas. And when you think about that, that combination of digital, where they take a picture of your mouth, and the physical, the manufacturing of these clear plastic aligners, that's only part of their business. In most parts of the world, orthodontists straighten our teeth and dentists clean our teeth. Align Technology figured out that they could have, for very simple teeth straightening, dentists could prescribe this. And they were able to grow their market by combining both technological innovation and business model innovation. The company is currently worth $24 billion in market value. Completely changed the entire way that the teeth straightening industry is explored by being creative with how they make new technologies and creative with new business models. Now, the third of the brainy or digital attributes is sometimes called the amygdala, or this is the part of our brain that we use for empathy in dealing with our employees and with our customers. And the company we studied in the book is called Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare company in the United States worth about $90 billion. And the way they try to think about how they develop empathy, the former CEO, the picture that was shown, Bernard Tyson, used to talk, he would spend one day a month just watching how his doctors and nurses worked. He would spend one day a month not in meetings, just trying to understand how people worked so that he could figure out how to make his employees' lives better. My question for all of you is, do you watch the men and women who work for you? And do you understand what is easy for them and what is hard for them on a daily basis? Do you align incentives for the right behavior, not for what you used to need to do, but for what you want them to do in the future? One of the things that Kaiser Permanente did is they gave bonuses to their people and measured by healthy life years of the people that they served, their patients and their members. They figured out they could make the most money if they kept their patients alive and healthy as long as possible, which is everything you want in a healthcare provider. And they use a lot of digital technologies to make it easier to serve customers, not just to save money, but to serve them better and keep them alive and healthy as long as possible. Kaiser Permanente is one of the most advanced technological service organizations in healthcare in the United States in thinking about how to use tools, smartphones, tools for wellness, digital tools for wellness, things like wearables, like the Oura Ring that I'm wearing right now, to make sure they get better information for their customers to keep them alive and healthy as long as possible. The fourth one that I talk about is managing risk. And we think about this is the prefrontal cortex in our brain, where we worry about fight or flight. The company we studied here was AB InBev, the large Brazilian and now Dutch beer company that many of us know so well. They were trying to figure out, how do they get more aggressive on innovation? The company was built through a series of global acquisitions worth billions of dollars. And they realized they needed to change how they were running their business. And so the CEO of the business took one of his star employees, a gentleman named Pedro Earp, and made him the Chief Disruptive Growth Officer. And the reason this was so important is he took one of his star leaders and said, you need to figure out how to change our organization. You need to figure out how to use venture capital, how to make an accelerator successful so we can do new businesses inside of our company. And Earp looked at Brito, who was the CEO, and said, how do I make any difference? Our company has $70 billion in sales. Even if I'm successful, if I get to $1 billion in revenue in 3 years, how does that have an impact? How will I know if I'm successful? And the CEO looked at him and said, you'll know you're successful when you infect the entire organization in a new way of thinking, when your job is no longer necessary. Now, if you think about that from Pedro's point of view, that's a pretty radical way of thinking about your business and towards risk. Success was defined by his CEO if he didn't need a job or have a job anymore. How many of you in your roles or in the people who work for you would take a job knowing that success meant you don't have a job anymore? You have to make change personal and risk-taking personal. And in a culture like we see here in Japan, large, successful organizations, consensus-driven, where taking risks sometimes is not the natural thing to do. We have to do the exact opposite in a world that's changing as quickly as ours is. The last thing I'll talk about on the brainy side is balancing ownership and partnership. Now, no company can do everything themselves in a changing world. And it's very important to have key partners that can help you learn and can help fill out other things that are necessary for what your customers might want to do. The company we studied in the United States is called Instacart. They do grocery delivery inside of the United States. They became hugely successful during the pandemic. They actually have 4 different parties that they need to cooperate with. The men and women who shop on their phones for the groceries, the people who go into the stores to buy the groceries, the grocery stores themselves, and the brands, the products, because of all the data that they are able to collect from the various purchases that are made all over the country and now all over Canada as well. They've got to figure out what should they own, who should they hire, and how do they find that balance with ownership and partnership. And what they realize, they have many different constituencies that they need to manage, and they have to see that complexity and that interaction that happens in a world where everything is connected and figure out what they're going to do and where they're going to partner. And I call that the inner ear, which is that balancing of ownership and partnership. In many companies, we get very comfortable when we vertically orient everything ourselves. But in a new world where new technologies are developing at incredible pace, we can't do it all ourselves. So those are the 5 digital attributes. We then in the book start talking about some of the physical attributes. I'm only going to stress a couple of them here just because of time. If you go through the book, we'll talk about logistics, which is a very important part of many companies and is a source of competitive advantage, in particular when you combine a digital front end for your customers with a good logistical back end. Manufacturing, historically one of Japan's strengths, is going to continue to be important, and we'll see a lot of new technologies on a go-forward basis, additive manufacturing, 3D printing, which is going to change how everything is made going forward. What you'll find is that will not be a move to manufacture things just in places where there's low-cost labor. You're going to have to be far more strategic about what you manufacture and where you manufacture. What I do want to talk about, the 2 things that I think are very important on the physical side, most importantly, organizing ecosystems. Inside of your companies, you have a lot that goes on. But in a world where everything is connected and data is flowing between different parts of your ecosystem, how you drive that ecosystem becomes critical to success. This very simple map that you see on the screen is called an influence map. And this is one I did for Google with Android, now Alphabet. And Android is in the center, and what you see, there are many different players that are part of their ecosystem. Carriers, handset makers, advertisers, governments, customers. And each one of these parties is influencing and pulling on the other side. I will often work with companies, and I'll ask them, go spend 20 minutes and draw an influence map of your ecosystem. And they'll come back to me after 20 minutes and say, Rob, that wasn't enough time. And I say, that's my point. Trying to understand who's influencing who and who's dependent upon who is absolutely critical. Because by the way, in a world where everything is changing and changing very quickly, you will find that some of these people will be under stress. And when companies are under stress, they react and send ripples through their ecosystem. You'll notice here I have the point about government strategy. Every company needs to have a government strategy. Whether you like government or don't like government doesn't matter. 21st century geopolitical conflict is being shaped by economic ideology. Some could argue Japan, more than any country in the world, is literally caught between the United States and China. And whether you're a large company or a small independent company, you're going to need to know how to manage and navigate across borders. Because even if we see a world where there are geopolitical tensions, connectivity and collaboration tools is not slowing down. And even individuals will be crossing borders around the world, not just people who run large multinationals. The last thing I'll talk about on the brawn side, the physical side, is stamina and how do you survive over time. Many of your companies have been very successful, some of them maybe for decades or maybe even over 100 years. How does a company survive that long? We found that the greatest companies who were able to survive had certain attributes. They knew their purpose. The picture that Toru-san showed of Alex Gorsky, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, if you move in, go to any Johnson & Johnson building anywhere in the world, right when you walk in on the front wall is what's called the credo. And they talk about who they serve in order: patients, doctors and nurses, the communities where they work, and finally the shareholders. And that ability to prioritize and know who are the key constituents and their importance allows them to survive over time and know how to prioritize things. And they do that by nurturing ongoing innovation to make sure they're always serving their customers better. Okay. All right, so that's a high-level overview of Brains and Brawn. Let me show you two companies that I talk about in the book, and maybe you'll get a sense of like how you might be able to apply this to your companies. I analyzed two companies in detail. Daimler, Mercedes-Benz. Many of you know them quite well. They make beautiful cars. And then I also analyzed an American startup called 23andMe, which does genetic sequencing. And that genetic sequencing is being used to develop therapeutics and pharmaceuticals in ways that are completely different than how it was done in the past. And you look at this picture, and you'll see as I go through here, you'll see Daimler, I rated them 1 to 10 on every attribute of the 10 attributes, and I did the same thing for 23andMe. And you get to the bottom and you get a score. And you look at this and you say, Daimler has a score of 65. And 23andMe has a score of 82. Now, if I was sitting in the audience, I'd be saying, Rob, that's kind of crazy. Daimler has almost 300,000 employees, 160 billion euros in revenue. And 23andMe is this little startup. Let me ask you to potentially reframe how we look at this ratings. The thing we should notice about Daimler is they're great at the brawny attributes, but they very much struggled on the digital attributes. And we've seen that in how Mercedes has struggled against Tesla and is now struggling against Polestar and BYD out of China. Similarly, with 23andMe, they're very strong in the digital attributes, and they're actually pretty good in the physical attributes of where they need to be. And for example, with making things, the score is low, but they partnered with a large British pharmaceutical company so that they would not have to manufacture the pharmaceuticals that are developed with their data and their information. And what I would encourage you to do is to be thinking about your companies. And it's not so important whether your company scores a 65 or a 70 or a 72. The question is your company at a 65 or a 90? How are you doing on blending digital and physical? What are the parts of the 10 attributes where you're strong? And maybe what are the parts where you're not as strong, where you need to move resources over to those parts to increase your spending there? And again, this is just a framework for you to think through about a way to look at your company. All right, that's Brains and Brawn. Let me spend a few minutes talking about systems leadership, and then we'll do our workshop where we can do the panel. Now, I argue that in a world where everything is connected, where every product and service is connected, a new type of leadership is required. In the old days, we used to have people who were good at operations on this side and people who were good at innovation on the other side. And we tried to keep them apart. But in a world where technology is changing so quickly, I define a new type of leadership called systems leadership. The ability to understand interactions between different parts of a company and your company as part of your ecosystem, and to master different strategies at the same time. The ability to blend digital plus physical, IQ plus EQ, internal plus external, short-term and long-term. These things used to be kept separate. I'm going to argue the next generation of leaders, all of you, need to be able to do both of these at the same time. Perhaps one way to think about it, the digital thinker, kind of represented by Silicon Valley, is this first column. We think about horizontal and platforms. We think about software. We want to get as large as possible. We want everybody to be using the same platform. Mark Zuckerberg woke up today. 8 billion people on the planet. 2 billion people will use Meta products today. He's thinking he's got 6 billion people to go. When I ran my division of GE, it was a physical mindset, vertical, hardware, continuous improvement. If I gave my customers a 6 to 8% cost improvement every year, they'd never leave me. A systems leader is actually good at both of these things. They understand how to be scalable on both hardware and software. Like Align Technology, they know how to have an innovative platform, which is the digital ability to take pictures of our mouth, and a customizable front end. So we all get customized plastic trays for our teeth. Portfolio career. You may not realize this, but the young people in your companies, they all have a side hustle. They all have another job that they're doing at the same time. I see this everywhere in the world. My question for all of you is, how are you thinking about the future of work to allow your young employees to do that inside of the company anyways? Because they're going to do it, you might as well be aware of it. How do you think about having a balanced view towards government? This is what systems leaders need to be able to bring. Now, some of the lessons we learned from some of the great teachers, the leaders that we studied, broadly speaking, great systems leaders are able to recognize patterns and they take specific actions. They drive change in their company through times of incredible uncertainty. I travel all over the world. Right now, what we are all seeing and feeling is very unsettling. Geopolitically, technologically, we just came out of COVID. This is my 50th trip to Japan. I haven't been here in 17 years. Right? One of my closest friends hasn't been here. He works for Sony, hasn't been back since the pandemic. And all of us are unsettled, trying to understand what is the new world going to be. And systems leaders need to set that tone for their companies and their organizations. One of the things I like to talk about is the future of work. Now, in this left column, we see a lot of technologies that we're familiar with: artificial intelligence, machine learning, the cloud. These are functions inside of your company: sales, marketing, manufacturing, engineering, operations. These are the decisions you make as leaders. Where will you allocate capital? What will you make? What will you buy? What will you insource? What will you outsource? Look at this line right down here, training plan. If you go back to your company today, you know what jobs are going to go away in the next 5 years because of these technologies. You know what jobs are going to go away in the next 5 years because of automation. My question for all of you, what are you doing to retrain your labor force starting today? There are two types of people in the world: those who have hearts and those who don't. Now, I'm not sure which one you are, but I do know no matter which one you are, you want to do the same thing. If you have a heart, you want to retrain your labor force because people have families and they have roofs they want to put over their head. We care about the people we work with. If you only care about the bottom line, you want to do the same thing. retrain your labor force. Economists teach us that it's 40% less expensive to retrain somebody than to fire somebody and then hire somebody new. And in certain parts of the world, we know that it's hard to sometimes fire people. The challenge all of you face, you've got to do this, and you cannot wait for our education system to retrain your labor force. And this idea that we go to school until we're 22 years old and then we stop learning, that's over. Look at the speed with which artificial intelligence is impacting all of your companies, how data is impacting all of your companies. We as individuals not only need to keep our skills current, we need to make sure our teams can also stay current. One of the things that is often talked about is bias. We are all biased as humans. Bias is not bad, it's just who we are. We're biased by where we were raised, where we went to school, our country, our culture. All of you, the more senior you get, the challenge is no one in your company will tell you the truth. They will tell you what they think you want to hear. You've never lost an argument or a conversation with anybody in your own conference room. And the more senior you get inside of a company, that becomes very difficult because you need to know how your bias might be getting in the way of the decisions that you're making. As an example, in my venture capital firm, my partner was trained as a lawyer. I'm a former CEO. We look at every investment opportunity very differently. I look at it, if I were running this company, what would I have to think about? My business partner looks at an investment opportunity and says, what are the legal ramifications? That's bias. The best leaders we studied, the best systems leaders, found trusted people outside of their company that they could work with and partner with, who could tell them the truth about their products, their company, and also themselves. You need to find good partners that you trust who can help you understand what's going on so that your frame, based upon what you've learned, doesn't allow you to miss things that are coming at you. In a world of confusion, truth equals facts plus context. Now, context is how we understand things. It's a set of circumstances by which we understand things. One of the best leaders I ever saw on managing context is Ruth Porat, who's the president of Alphabet and Google. She came to my class, and I asked the students, how come everybody hates Facebook so much more than they hate Google? And the students gave me very squishy answers. Ruth came to the front of the room, and she said, our job at Google is to help you find what you want. If you come to us and do a search, and we send you somewhere, if we made it, great. If somebody else made it, great, you'll come back to us. We don't want to hold on to you and keep you on our website or in our app for hours and hours with the hope that you'll never leave. That was managing context. She was able to frame a very negative perception, holding on to a customer and never letting them go, with the notion of comparing that to Google of how to be helpful. She was managing context for my students right in that moment of being a good storyteller. Great systems leaders know how to tell stories in times of confusion. And right now we are dealing with some very, very confusing and challenging times. If you did not study engineering in university, don't panic. However, in a world where every product and service has a technology component, I'm going to argue there are 4 technologies you need to be conversant in. We call them the 4 A's. Artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, sometimes called 3D printing, analytics, data, and finally automation. This can be physical robotics or it can be digital RPA. You need to have an opinion on whether or not your company is developing these technologies or applying these technologies. I've been teaching modules in my product management course at Stanford on artificial intelligence and analytics for the last 6 years. No matter what company it is, consumer products, again, aircraft, trains, you choose, there is not a function inside of your company that's not being impacted by 3 or 4 of these various technologies. Now, you do not have to know how to write code, but you need to go and teach yourself, how do these things work and how does it impact your company and your function? The good news is there are amazing universities online where you can take a course that explains this from all over the world. Stanford, Cal, IIT, Tokyo University here. Choose your favorite university. There's amazing information online, but you need to learn these all yourself, and you can't just delegate these to others. A few final points about systems leadership. One of the great leaders we studied, a woman by the name of Katrina Lake, asks her direct reports the following question every year. If you were hiring for your job today, would you hire yourself? If you were hiring for your job today, would you hire yourself? Have you kept your skills current? The good news is there's nothing that stops you. There's nothing that stops you from retraining yourself. But in a world where technology is changing more quickly, you've got to stay current with your own capabilities and competencies as a systems leader. Lastly, in times of great disruption and great stress, we tend to fall back on who we are as individuals. We all have strengths and development needs. You have strengths and development needs, so do I. In my case, my greatest strength happens to be my greatest development need. My passion is my greatest strength. If you were to come to Stanford and you were to come into my classroom, I'm running up and down the aisles. I'm talking to students and making them talk back. I don't care where in the world they're from. They're going to engage with me. And I'm having a ton of fun. My passion, it's natural. I was born this way. My greatest development need, my greatest weakness is my passion. When I was younger, the way this used to manifest itself in business, I used to send what are called flame emails. You know, you can write an email, especially in the United States, show a lot of passion. And I would write these emails and they would be sarcastic, emotional, accurate, and they were always ineffective. Always. And I would spend days cleaning up my mess. Komada-san, sitting in the audience, used to work for me. He remembers some of those emails. Now, today, when I feel those emotions, I hear a voice in the back of my head that says, Rob, walk away from the keyboard. Go somewhere else. Be thinking about what your strengths and development needs are, because in times of stress, that self-awareness becomes very critical as a systems leader. Everything that we've talked about here for your company, and that's in the book, Brains and Brawn, there's nothing that you can't do. All of these things that we've talked about, systems leadership, you are fully capable of doing these things, and your company is capable of learning from it. I ask people 4 questions when they ask me where should they start. The first question I ask people is, what do all these changes of digital and physical, what do they mean for your customers? Don't start with your company. Start with the men and women you serve. The second question I like to ask, what is your company's biggest advantage? What are you better at than anyone else that you want to make sure you don't lose in these times of transition? The third thing, what are you not doing today that you need to be doing and everybody knows it? And then lastly, what's one thing that you can do differently? What's just one thing that you can do differently to become a systems leader inside of your company? If you can start with these 4 questions, all of this can be done. And the idea behind the book and the idea behind Brains and Brawn is you can analyze your company And you can also think about yourselves and how you need to change your behaviors as a systems leader. My hope is that as you go through the book, you'll find that the companies, which come from all over the world, there are lessons that can be applied, especially here in Japan. And with that, I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak for you for a few minutes, and hopefully that gives you a brief summary of the book. Thank you very much. ありがとうございます。